Cheers. Nicola, that was a fascinating presentation. I'm going to be showing you stuff about budgets and stuff. It doesn't seem quite as interesting as what Nicola's going to do. So today I'm going to be talking about the Harvey Nash KPMG CIO Survey. It's a huge undertaking. I'll share some of the key insights from it. But before I do, I just wanted to explain why there's this, we call him Kevin the chameleon. Technology and IT leaders are undergoing a huge transformation at the moment. We see it all the time as we recruit CIOs and IT leaders into different organizations. And the concept of transformation and change and adapting is so important in the industry in many ways. In one sense, transformation is happening to organizations themselves. In another sense, transformation is happening to whole sectors. And then finally, the role of the technology leader is transforming. So that's why we've got Kevin there. It also makes for a kind of beautiful little image in the background. So the CIO survey, it's a huge survey. 4,000 CIOs, IT leaders, and technology leaders in 84 countries fill it in each year. It's the largest IT leadership study in the world. $250 billion IT budget is represented in the survey, which is actually, if you turn that into a GDP of a country, that's the equivalent of Switzerland, Ireland, that sort of size. So it's pretty big countries. What we're going to be doing here is presenting the global data from the survey. But what I'll also do is where sectors are slightly different, I'll kind of pick that out. And we had 200 responses from the higher education sector, so if that's a sector you're in, we've got a pretty good sample rate. We didn't actually ask specifically about whether somebody was in the housing sector, so forgive me, we're going to use a proxy for that, which is the not-for-profit sector. But again, we had about 200 responses there, so again, a pretty good sample. This is the 20th year we've had the CIO survey. We launched it 20 years ago. CIOs weren't even really around 20 years ago, and a lot has changed in those 20 years. 20 years ago, the world's population was just under 6 billion. It's now 1.5 billion larger. In 1900, the world's population was 1.5 billion, so we've put on a huge amount of population in that time. The world's population, just under 4% had access to the internet. That's now gone to the majority. So wherever you go in the world, there's over a 1 in 2 chance that you'll have access to the internet. The top 3 most valuable companies, mixture of companies there, Microsoft, I guess, was in there. The top 3 most valuable companies, in fact, the top 6 in the top 10 are all technology companies. In 1998, Steve Jobs returned to a failing company called Apple, and you can see what changed there. So much has changed in the industry, and it's something that we're all part of. I'm going to cover 6 points from the survey. There's a URL at the end of this presentation that you can visit, and you can download and kind of pile into the rest of the survey later on. So, point number 1, IT investment is growing. We're seeing 49% of CIOs and IT leaders are reporting budget increases in the last 12 months. That's the highest it has ever been in the entire 13 years that we've been tracing it. It's a pretty significant figure. And you can see how here we've got the big downturn, and you can see how it's kind of broadly kind of stepped up. And actually the jump that we're seeing of 3%, we haven't seen that jump for a while, so it's a pretty positive indication. When I look at education and charity and not-for-profit, the actual increase in budgets is a little lower, but it's still, this is probably a little bit misleading, it's still over 4 in 10 people are experiencing budget increases. We're also seeing headcount increases, so 47% of CIOs and IT leaders are recruiting people, and we're now at the lowest figure of people who are decreasing their headcount. It's a kind of double whammy because more people are hiring, but less people are going out into the market. So it's creating quite a kind of a funnel and a talent shortage. All of those are positive things, but we're also seeing something that we weren't expecting. This question asked, is the role of the IT leader getting more strategic? You just kind of saw it, and again, this is the downturn. So this is kind of quite prescient, actually, because it was tracing it down even before the downturn happened. And then we're seeing it pretty much sort of leveling out and increasing over the following years. And then in the last year, it's gone down by 6%. I don't want to make too much out of a 1-year piece of data. It may well be a blip. But it does indicate and perhaps hint that the role of IT leaders is changing. And some of the certainties that were existing in the past, especially with cloud computing, the rise of the CDO, all of the transformation that's happening in the industry, some of those certainties may be being removed as we speak. Secondly, we talked about all of the budget increases. Well, we're seeing a resourcing challenge. Here, 65% of you are saying that you're suffering from a skill shortage. It is actually stopping the organization innovate. And that's the highest level that we've had since, well, before the downturn. When we look at the not-for-profit and the education sectors, these are in the top 3 sectors that are suffering for a major skill shortage. So that's quite an intriguing prospect. We do another survey called the Technology Survey, where we asked the people who are within the technology teams, the people that are hired into IT departments and software development departments, what motivates you? And 60% of them, when they were given a kind of a binary or a choice, an exclusive choice between purpose, financial reward, and status, purpose came out as the biggest thing by a long margin. And it just kind of led me to go, well, given the fact that higher education and housing are sectors that do have quite a strong purpose to them, you would have thought that would tie up with the fact that we've got people who are looking for purpose. So we didn't ask any further questions about it, but it's just something worth thinking about. Maybe salary is a challenge, or maybe the message isn't getting out quite strongly in the marketplace about what can be offered by the sectors that you're working in. Some of the tactics that IT leaders are using to fill that gap, yeah, of course they're using contractors to fill that skills gap. Of course they're using outsourcing. But what's quite interesting is that this is the first time that we've seen automation jump into the charts as being something that people are going, we've got a recruitment problem here, we're going to use technology to solve it, not hiring. Not great news for recruiters like Harvey Nash, but hey, this is the reality. And 19% say that to a great extent. So automation is something that is we're kind of tracking on the radar a lot more now. Outsourcing, usually when we see budget increases, we see that outsourcing increases as well. So if I kind of superimposed the IT budget increase, it would kind of follow the same thing again, downturn, works its way up. And the IT budget was actually going up. But this is the first time that we've seen the ways diverge. And it was a curious point, really. And I think that when we speak with CIOs and IT leaders, I think what they're beginning to do is they're not stopping outsourcing, but what they are doing is taking a more considered look about what resources they want in-house and what they want out of house. And certainly when it comes around to innovation and driving new ideas, they're actually beginning to see that that's something that sits in-house. And then they want advice and guidelines and agility and extending workforce. That often happens out of house. So this may kind of reflect that trend of people just reassessing a little about how they outsource. I mean, outsourcing will always remain a key tactic of a CIO, but it goes up and down. With outsourcing, education and not-for-profit track just a little below the average, but pretty much there in the middle. Shadow IT. We asked the question, what proportion of your budget is controlled outside the IT department? And this tracks the proportion of organizations where more than 10% of the budget is outside the IT department. And of course, we're asking the CIOs this, so almost by definition, you don't know what you don't know. I'm sure it is a lot higher than this. So it's going up, and it's been going up, and it will, we are sure, continue to go up. In the case of sector, I think charity and not-for-profit and education is slap bang kind of in the middle, perhaps a little bit higher, greater amount of shadow IT. Interestingly, at the bottom here, we've got some of the more regulated industries and the industries where there's a lot of process control and manufacturing. So these are industries where shadow IT and going off and kind of purchasing software outside the structure and the governance seems to be happening less. Shadow IT is a challenge in one sense. I mean, it's so easy, and I'm a marketing director, and I've gone off and used my credit card to buy software that people then fill in. It may start off with a very simple form that people fill in their details on that form. And then I go, oh, okay, well, can we ask some more information? And next thing you know, you've got this huge system that's sitting there, and that's all because I've got a credit card. So you can see that these kind of issues happen, and yet there's a real benefit in shadow IT, because part of the challenge that many people have within IT is actually getting ownership of systems and making sure that the business is actually looking after them. Well, getting them to pay for it for a start and actually getting them to run it is a wonderful way of getting people to buy into systems and to innovate. But of course, you get this situation of where, and we've seen it with GDPR projects, you begin to see this whole splurge of systems that go trace across a company, often having nightmarish situations of where data is being stored in places that you don't want it to be stored. And GDPR projects have revealed these mines of data where many CIOs kind of lose sleep at night. So what we're seeing is that shadow IT perhaps is stepping out of the shadows. It's growing. It's an inevitable thing. And many CIOs and IT leaders are actually actively embracing it, in fact, actively encouraging it. But what they're doing is they're investing in a different governance model that allows it to happen, but still maintain and just enough control to make sure that things don't run off the rails. We often talk in the CIO survey about security. And security, this year, there have been more security infringements than there were last year, and last year there were more than the year before. So there's a graph, but I won't show you that graph. What I will show you is the Cambridge Analytica logo. This isn't so much about security, it's actually about trust of consumers in organizations. The Cambridge Analytica scandal for Facebook wiped $100 billion off the value of Facebook, which is actually the market capitalization of Nike. So, I mean, that's a huge amount of money. The market cap of Facebook did retrace its value a little bit, and then it started going downhill ever since. It's a real issue that when you have these sort of infringements of trust with companies that are so centered upon the data of people, it has a massive impact. And boards of organizations, perhaps really for the first time, the narrative has moved away from just simply being, is somebody going to hack into my system? It's actually about whether customers trust you. I took a look on Google and had a look at my activity in there. This is me. This shows how boring my life is. But anyway, this is where I've been for the last couple of years. And I looked at some of the history within Google. And I was actually terrified by about how much knowledge Google had of me. And it wasn't because I didn't know that I had given that information. I'd ticked all of those privacy notices, and I'd looked behind those privacy notices to see what information I was giving them. But what terrified me was what happened when Google mixed it all together and started analyzing it and mixing it up and seeing all of the different assets that Google owns, not all of which are called Google, and piecing together information about me that I hadn't really predicted. That was quite scary. It's not therefore surprising that in the last year, the biggest growing concerns for the boards have been improving cybersecurity, of course, but also managing the operational risk of running a company that is becoming increasingly data-centric. So if you're ever walking into a board meeting, you should be talking about those two things. First of all, of course, innovation, new products to market, but actually, they're scared of those things. One CFO once said to me, when talking about GDPR and the fine that can be applied to a company if you run foul of the GDPR, he said, if I ever have to write a check for 4% of my company's revenue, it will be the last check I write for that company. And he's quite right. That's why it focuses the mind. Cybersecurity, I've just picked this out. I've said that we wouldn't speak about cybersecurity, but when we looked at the sector differences, this was just very interesting. Education is the most hacked sector. It is, I don't know whether this is something that can be picked up in drinks afterwards. I'll be very intrigued to see why that is the case. I guess I speculate that in a sector where you've got a lot of intelligent people who you might not have utter control over, many studying computer studies, that might be the reason. But hey, we'll speculate over a glass of wine. The fifth out of the 6 point is making a success of digital. I just kind of made some comments here, really. This is the question that says, save or make money? What's the most important project for the CEO? It's a kind of a binary decision. Are you going to save money or make money with an IT project? And it's interesting to see that in both the not-profit and education sector, that actually the bias runs away from the norm, which is saving money is a more important thing. It's not to say that there aren't many organizations that want to make money, but saving money seems to be the main focus. And then when we have a look at enterprise-wide digital strategies, education features quite low down on the scale of the number of organizations that have it. Not-for-profit also fairly low down. These aren't necessarily bad things. It just says that within those sectors, the focus is perhaps more inward-looking than it is to some of the other sectors which are outward-looking. But it did intrigue us because we then looked at those organizations within those sectors that have a strong digital outlook, so that looked at their, considered their digital strategy in the highly effective zone. And what we actually saw was in the higher education sector, the ones that said were in the top 15% of digital leaders were 80% more likely to have grown their revenue in the last year. And then the digital leaders in the not-for-profit sector were 50% more likely to grow their revenue. So what it's saying is that whilst the sectors generally are pointed to slightly inward-looking, there are some organizations that are kind of breaking free of that, of becoming digital leaders. And what we're seeing is that that's making a difference to something that probably matters to any board. This data is of the global data, but we then said, well, what are the board priorities of those digital leaders, and then what is the global average? We can see in the digital leaders, developing new products and services is just utterly the key one. And then also enhancing customer excellence. So it ties up very much with what kind of Nicola was talking about. You'll see those same things, developing new products and services for the average organization is much further down, and so is enhancing customer experience. What's really interesting is that actually the second one is the same for both, which is the kind of standard boring stuff of IT, but it seems very, very important. You're not going to be able to persuade a CEO to develop any innovative product or service or enhance customer experience if your whole network's down all of the time. So an IT leader can only come to the board table if they are delivering stable IT. We also looked at what was behind, what were the IT leaders doing to become digital leaders? And there were three factors. One is that they're really focused on the customer. It's really, when people talk, and Mark referred to this at the very beginning around, well, what is a digital strategy and what is digital innovation? And actually, very few people could come up with some definition. But one thing that we are seeing is that people are kind of almost putting the definition to one side and saying, what does the customer want? And that's a great start, and that kind of gives a kind of a guiding light to where people should go. And we're seeing that in digital leaders. They're measuring the profitability of customers. They're attracting new customers digitally, and they're kind of showing you that they're really focused on that. They also recognize that a technology strategy is nothing without people who are bought into it and people who will come up with the ideas. So a digital leader is almost twice as likely to feel that their strategy will fail if they don't have the right culture in their organization, which is quite a key point because sometimes technology departments are often focused on technology, but as we know, so much fails when you don't have the people to see it through. Finally, digital leaders they create frameworks. So whereas maybe 20 years ago, a CIO or IT leader would measure their value and their worth by how many people were in their team and what their budgets were, and that was kind of the badge of honor. That's changed now. Now they're saying, well, I want to influence people, and actually I don't mind whether that IT spend is happening under my remit. I just want to make sure I'm influencing it to that right level. So they're using proper governance frameworks to allow that to happen, and they're finding that whilst they're giving up control, they are gaining so much more influence. You give up one bit of control, you get 10 bits of influence back, because it's all about trust. And CIOs and IT leaders tend to can build trust quite easily with their counterparts. So that all amounts to the kind of the final point, that it is a changing landscape for the CIO and IT leaders. We've got kind of the CDO, we've got increasing importance of digital. All of these things are happening at the same time. It's almost made us ask, should this even be called the CIO survey? Because in reality, it isn't really about the CIO as such. It's actually about technology. And the successful people will be the ones who almost kind of put job titles and job responsibilities to one side and actually just chase that goal of going, well, how can we use technology, and it doesn't matter whose budget it is, how can we use technology to really make a difference to the customer and to the organization? 2 final points. Oh, I'm imploring you to fill, if you are invited to take part in the survey, please do take part. It takes 20 minutes. It's good use of your time. You get all of this great stuff, the report itself, invite to an event. You'll get a personal benchmark report that compares your responses and your salary to other people. If you wanted to see whether you're being overpaid or underpaid, take it to your boss. And, well, if you're overpaid, don't take that to your boss. But you get the idea. And then also, if you want to download the report, there's also some great, we've got a data visualization tool that allows you to play around with the data and do lots of what-ifs. So go to HN, it's not the snappiest of titles, I'm sorry, but hnkpmgciosurvey.com. Thank you very much.